Hey guys, today we are talking about modal verbs. We're going to learn what they are and how we can use them in business. Now, modal verbs are often used to add more meaning to a sentence. And we use them in four main areas. So possibility, probability, ability, and necessity. This is how we often teach students to use modal verbs. So for example, possibility. The officer may call us for more details. So that is not 100% certain, but there is a chance that it could happen. He may call us for more details. It could happen. Another example, the applicant might cancel his project. The applicant might cancel his project. So the word might is a modal verb that suggests that this is a possibility. It is not certain, 100% certainty, that the applicant will cancel the project, and it isn't impossible either. It's somewhere in the middle. It is perhaps a 50% chance of it happening. It might happen. Now, we can also use modal verbs to talk about probability, so something that is quite likely to happen. It has a higher percentage chance of happening. So the example given here, your father should be home any minute now. Should is a modal verb that means that there is a high chance of it happening. It is probably going to happen. Your father should be home any minute now. Another example, he never replied to my message. He must not like me. Now, you don't know that for certain, but based on the evidence, you are saying that there is a high percentage chance he must not like me. It is probable. We also use modal verbs for ability. So to talk about things that we can do. So for example, she can juggle. She can juggle. Can is a modal verb that tells us that she has the ability to juggle. Another example, John could drive you to the airport. So could is a modal verb that tells us that John has that ability. It does not necessarily mean that he will drive us to the airport, but perhaps he has a car and he has a driving license. He has the ability to drive us to the airport. John could drive us to the airport. And finally, we use modal verbs for necessity. So, you must return his call. You must return his call. Must is a modal verb. It suggests that something is necessary, something that you have to do. You must return his call. I have to use the toilet. I have to use the toilet. It is a necessity. You have no choice about it. I have to use the toilet. So as you can see, modal verbs can be very good at adding more meaning to a sentence. But where I think modal verbs are so important is in the next two areas that we are going to look at. Let's see what they are. Okay, so these are the two areas that modal verbs are so important, especially in business. We are looking at permission and requests. So let me tell you about my friend. I have a friend, he's a lovely bloke, he's a lovely man, but he is not a native English speaker and he does not know how to use modal verbs. And that means a lot of people think that he's quite rude. He's not, he doesn't mean to be rude, but he seems rude because of the way he speaks, because he does not use modal verbs in his sentences. And that's the danger. If you do not fully understand how to use modal verbs correctly, you might sound rude in your conversation to others. So for example, my friend would not say, "May I ask who is calling?" He would simply say, "Who is calling?" Who is calling? It sounds quite rude. By using a modal verb, may I ask who is calling, it suddenly becomes a lot more polite. The same is true with, "Can we reschedule the meeting?" My friend would just say, "We will reschedule the meeting." We will reschedule the meeting. But that is a demand. That is telling people what they are going to do. Modal verbs, you will see, often change a demand into a question. So instead of demanding that we will reschedule the meeting, you can say, "Can we reschedule the meeting?" So the modal verb can has changed this quite rude demand into a polite question. Can we reschedule the meeting? Have a look at this one. I have spoken to a few students before, and they have said that when they go to a restaurant, when they get to the end of their meal and they want to pay, they do what they have seen people do in the movies. So they go, "Check, please." That's quite rude. We would not normally do that in a restaurant. Instead, what we would do is we would use modal verbs to ask politely for the check. So you would use the modal verb may I have the check, please? And of course, you can mix up the modal verbs. You could say, "Can I have the check, please?" "Could I have the check, please?" Here we've chosen to use, "May I have the check, please?" A very polite way to ask for the bill. So here are two that you might use in the office. So perhaps you're a manager and you have a secretary. You could just make a demand to your secretary. You could say, "Take my messages while I'm out." But again, that is quite rude. And if you keep doing that, your secretary probably won't like you very much. So what you can do is you can use modal verbs to turn that demand into a polite question. So the modal verb will. "Will you take my messages while I'm out?" Now, of course, the answer is going to be yes, that is the person's job. But it is a polite way to ask. Will you take my messages while I'm out? The same is true for the next one. Instead of just saying, "Get some hot drinks for our guest," turn it into a polite question by using a modal verb. Could you get some hot drinks for our guests? Could you get some hot drinks for our guests? Suddenly it's a nice polite request, and your secretary will be happy to do that job for you. So as you can see, using modal verbs is a great way to be polite when asking for something. Okay, so now it is your turn. So what we have here is a list of modal verbs and some actions that could go along with those modal verbs. Now, what I want you to do is just spend a few moments considering what sentences you can make out of these by combining them. So for example, can I take a message? Can I help? So you can use different modal verbs with different actions. So how many sentences can you make with these different modal verbs? Have a go. Okay, so was that quite easy for you? You might have noticed that some of these modal verbs are easier to make sentences out of than others. So ones like can, could, would. These are used a lot. Can works with pretty much everything. Can I take a message? Can you answer that for me? Can you repeat that, please? Can I ask who is calling? Can I help? Can you leave? Probably not the politest thing to say. Can works in many different situations. Other ones, such as might, is a little bit more limited on the occasions in which you can use it. So as you can see, there are many different uses for modal verbs. They add more meaning to our sentences, but they can also be used in business to make our requests sound a lot more polite. So I hope this lesson has been useful for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.